Hi, good evening.
Good evening, Rabbi.
Thank you. I didn't do the Facebook. Gotta do the Facebook. Everything is good. So I'm gonna read the Shulchan Aruch. I'm not sure if we did this, but I'll try it again. מותר להטמין בשבת דבר צונן. So we said, right, that you're allowed to insulate something which is cold, בדבר שאינו מוסיף הבal, as long as that substance doesn't add heat, כדי שלא יצטנן ביותר, in order that it shouldn't cool down more. או כדי לטפיק צנעתו, or to mitigate its coldness. אבל בדבר המוסיף אבל, but if it's something which adds heat, ואפילו להטמין צונן גמור, even if we're talking about insulating something which is totally cold, בעוד יום, right, before Shabbat, nami, so this is also forbidden. Wow, this is incredible. Okay, great. So that's the end of that. So I guess we'll go to the next one. Yeah, okay. So we're going to go to Zayin. This one we did already. Gotta do the second one. This one. Okay, so it says here, פירש רשב"ם, כל מה שתעשה הטמנה דווקא כשלא הגיע. So it says the Rashbam, when we forbade, right, to do insulation, that's only if it didn't come to the Machal Ben Drusai, right, 1/3 cooked. But if it did, according to this opinion, it's okay. So it says regarding that Bet Yosef, Divrei Rashbam Hizkirum Tosfot. So it says it's brought down in Tosfot, this Rashbam. Ve'arosh, also the Rosh Ve'aran, Ve'resh Pek Bamet Tomnin, right? They also bring it down, these rabbis. Ve'amordechi Pek Bamet Melikin, also this rabbi. So you got 4 rabbis who bring down this Rashbam. Ve'chulam Hiskimu Lidivrei Rabbeinu Tam. They all agreed to the words of Rabbeinu Tam. That even if it was cooked 1/3, asur listam atmana, forbidden. So they don't agree with the Rashbam, all these rabbis. They do bring it, but they don't agree with it. Asur listam atmana sorech machar. It's forbidden. Why? Because he says because usually insulation is for the next day, right? For the tomorrow. The tzarich chitui shelo yitkarer. So you're going to need to stir the coals in order that it shouldn't cool down. So it says a little bit of stirring the coals. That does work to preserve the heat. Since it's insulated. So then, right, we're concerned he's gonna insulate in the ashes, embers. That's what it says. All these rabbis say that. Even if you have a pot, even if you have a dish which is totally cooked, asur the stam kederot ben ashmashot mevushalot hen. So what's the reason? Because right, the average, your average garden variety dish during Ben Hashmashot, during twilight, they're cooked already. They're totally cooked. And we still said that you're not allowed to insulate it. So that implies that even if it's totally cooked, even if it's congealing and bad for it, asur mitama derabin Rabbeinu Tam. Still forbidden because of Rabbeinu Tam's reason. Why? Because a little stirring of the coals will succeed in preserving the heat. The Ran also says this. Says this rabbi, he says the Rabbeinu Tam didn't explain what is the din. If it totally cooked, it's got totally cooked. That's the end of it. Okay, so goes on. So it says reasoning is because that Rabbeinu Tam when he said, right, that's 1/3 cooked, he's talking about precisely that. But then he read when he read the lav dafka nakte, but he says really it's not precisely. Rather, he used the language of the Rashbam. And he says that this rabbi also wrote there. There are some big rabbis who said, even if it's congealing and bad for it, asur, it's going to be forbidden anyway. Okay, so that's the end of that. Fantastic. Okay, let's go to Shulchan Aruch Zayin. So it says here, Kol hechad de'asinan hatmanam. Whenever we forbid insulation, afilu b'kdera mevushelet, even if it's totally cooked, right? The dish. Kol tzorcho asinan, we still forbid that. We still don't allow to insulate. Afilu mitzamek veralo, even if it's congealing and bad for it, still we don't allow it. So when it comes to the issue of shehiyah, right, leaving it on the fire, there we were lenient regarding this, but here we're not lenient, right? When it comes to insulation, we're more stringent with insulation. So therefore, we say it's forbidden. So says the Ramah, this is the halacha. Some are lenient and they say the whole shehu chai legamre, if it's totally raw, or if it's totally cooked, mutar be'atmana, it's allowed to, you're allowed to insulate. Just like leaving it there on the fire. Like we said in this chapter. So it says in a place where they're lenient about this, don't object with them, they have what to rely on. But he says in other places, shouldn't be accustomed to do like that, since right, it's not really something the universal halacha here. That's what the Rama says. Uh-huh. So I'll read this one more time, just to make sure we got it. It says all when we forbid insulation, even called sokar, right? Even if it's something which is totally cooked, asinan, we still forbid it. Even if it's congealing and bad for it, which is an extra stringency there. But then the Ramah, right, says that's the halacha. But then he says, right, there are places where it's accustomed to be lenient a little bit more. So what does that mean? If it's totally raw or totally cooked, they allow you to do hatmana. They allow you to do insulation. Just like leaving it on the fire. So he says, right, whoever is accustomed to do this way can rely on it. The place is accustomed like that. But where it's not customary to do like that, then not to rely. That's what he says. Okay, great. So but according to Shulchan Aruch, right, the halacha is that we're not lenient about this. That's the bottom line. Okay, so I guess we'll go to Het, which is the last one. Let's see what we got. This one we did. Okay, so we're gonna do the second piece. This one. Long one. We may be able to finish it tonight. We'll see. Bezat Hashem. So it says over here. כתב אדוני הרב יש נוהגים לעשות חפירה אצל מקום האש. Oh, so we should read this in the tour because we didn't see this in the tour. So says the tour over here like this. כתב אדוני הרב ז"ל. Says the Rosh, יש נוהגים לעשות חפירה אצל מקום האש. There are some who are accustomed to do right חפירה. So what is חפירה? That means like a little hole in the ground. And excavation. That's what it really means, literally, this word, excavation. So you make a little hole there, right next to where the fire is, right? Merutzefet bilvanim. So it says it's like made out of lined with the bricks, saviv, around it. Umasikin ota, and then we ignite that with the fire. The gorfin ota, and then we remove the the coals. Umatminim, and we insulate there. Hakdera, the pot. Umechasin ota, then they cover it. Umeviim raya lemin hagam. They bring a proof source for their custom. Mehad ita beper kama the Shabbat, from what we have in first perek of Shabbat. Kidera chayta ubashil share. It says over there that if the pot is, as we said, right, if it's totally cooked or totally raw, it's allowed. You're allowed to put it inside the oven. So it doesn't resemble us so much that over there, that's talking about leaving on the fire. But here, that we're talking about insulation, and also something which adds heat. No, not so. So it says there is we should make a differentiation. That which we forbid, insulation, when it comes to something which adds heat, that's because of the decree. He's going to come to insulate in the ashes, as we said. But so he said that's like similar to insulating in the ashes. So why is that? Because since those ashes, right, touch the pot, saviv, all around, aval betanur, but when it comes to the oven, he says, v'chen bechafira, and also when it comes to a excavation, like we said, zo sheyesh avir habeh, there's a lot of airspace there, ben hadefanot nikdera, between the walls of that excavation and the pot. So he tells you something very important here, right? Which is that when do we say it's called hatmana, right? Something which is insulation. That's only if it's like touching the pot, around, surrounding it. But if it's something which is like, there's some airspace in between, so there we don't call that insulation, right? That's just the reason why when you put something in the oven, right, it's not considered like you're insulating it because there's airspace there. Same thing with this excavation as well. So he says, you don't need to be stringent with that. So same thing as like putting it, leaving it there in the fire. On the stove. So he says, regarding this, he was insulating. he had a stove, which where the walls are high. It's higher than the pot. So therefore, there's airspace between, right, the walls of the stove, to the pot. So therefore, what you do is you put the pot inside, and you're going to cover, right, the top of the stove, beluach, with some kind of a board, or some other, right, item. So he would put on the top of that cover also some clothing, right, rags, whatever. And he would say, right, this is not called insulation. Why is that? Because the pot is not really touching anything there. Therefore, it's just standing on the stove. And there's airspace also between the walls, between it and the walls. This is when it comes to insulation, right, that most people do. So what is it? How do they do it? They put the pot on top of the stove, and they cover it with rags. So I don't know what the reason would be to allow that. In other words, it shouldn't be allowed. Why is that? Even though you're allowed to insulate, right, with rags, but the problem is like this, right, that since under the pot you have some fire there going on, and it adds heat. That's the problem. Asul, that's going to be forbidden. Because Rabbi Zera said, right, that if you have a box, whatever, right, that he insulated in there, you're not allowed to place it al gabbe gifet. You're not allowed to place it on top of the olive pits, shilzatim. Alma afal pishe tomen bekupa. So he says, you see from there that even though he's insulating it inside the box, right, in a permitted manner, but since it's placed on something which adds heat, asu. So here also it should be asu. All the more so, right, it should be forbidden if the pot, the dish, is placed on top of the fire. Also, he says regarding the insulation of the Adonai V'Yosef, of the Rosh. So he says there's also a question there. There's a the Kupa Shetaman regarding from this Talmudic passage that we just mentioned. But he says the Rosh had a differentiation between one and the other to allow this. Since it's not the way to insulate like that. Like it's like in the box. Which is the way to insulate like that. Okay, I think this is already something else. That's a different story. Okay, so let's go to Bet Yosef. So it says with Bet Yosef here, Beresh Perek Damed Homrim, right? In this Perek, Shabbat, Katav Ken, he wrote like that. Vehud midivri Tosfot, comes from Tosfot. Sham. V'katvu Mordechai also writes it. V'samak v'atruma, right? All these rabbis. V'Rabbeinu Yerucham b'chelek Gimel, right? All these rabbis here. Katvu od v'Tosfot v'Arosh. They also said, right? Tosfot and Rosh. Sham, there, sheyesh mekomot. There are places. שבמקום שמסיקים האור, at the place where they ignite the fire, ובישלו כל הקדרות ביום לעת ערב, and they cooked all the dishes there, right, towards the evening. מסלק האש וגורפין הרמץ. So what you do is you remove the fire and shovel out the ashes, ונותנים הקדרה לצורך מחר. And then we leave the dish for tomorrow, ומכסין אותה באפר, we cover it with the ashes, צונן, which is cold, ולא דמה לרבי זרע, doesn't resemble the case of Rabbi Zera. The Amar, who said, Mem Zayin Amud Bet, kupa shetaman ba asur le'anicha al gabe gefet. Right, kupa, that the box which he insulated in there, you're not allowed to put it on top of the olive pits, shilzatim. The shani hatam, different there. Shenatan akdera lekupa, because you put the pot inside the box, the shem matmana for insulation. The gam rawi latmin betoch gefet. It's also fitting to insulate inside the olive pits. Shilzatim hilkach. So it says, therefore, ikara mechash, we're concerned, dilma ate latmin. They may come to insulate. Bon, insulate inside there. Well, the makom shebishlu akdera, but in the place where they cook the dish, all day, techila, in the beginning, netinat akdera, techilat netinat akdera, in the beginning when they put the pot, sham, lo, hayta l'sham, l'shem atmana, that wasn't for the sake of insulation. V'gam en rawi latmin betoch hakarka, so it's also, we don't insulate in the ground. Hilkach leka, he says, therefore, leka nechash lemidi, we're not really concerned about that. Ela ze k'tzat kasher, but it's difficult there. V'minhagam shegorufin umsalkin hakadera, because according to the custom, right, where they used to shovel out and remove the pot. And we're not particular where we put them. According to one language, he says, this perk, if he placed it on top of the ground, placed it on the ground, even if its intention is to return it, asur, it's forbidden. Even on Erev Shabbat, nami asur, it's going to be forbidden. Maybe he holds, he says that Kidach Lishna, like the other language, the Shara that allows us the Iniach al Gabe Karka, placed on top of the ground, in Dato Lechazir, its intention is to return it. V'siyem Harosh, and the Rosh concludes, V'katav Rabbeinu Chananel. This rabbi says, the Rach, Pasak Elishna de Machamir, he paskins like the stringent opinion. When he lead the law asina chazara be'odion, so it says we don't really forbid. Seems to me that we don't really forbid to return it before Shabbat. Ela hechad natla me'al, only if he took it from the from top of the stove. She'atida le'ashot alea u'lachazira alea, because he's going to leave it there and also to return it there. Lashum shehiyah, for leaving it there. She'imata matir lechazira, that if you permit, right, to return it before Shabbat, atel lechazira mishachashecha, he's going to return it also when it gets dark and when it's Shabbat already. Aval im lechazira l'shem matmana, but if he returned it for the sake of insulation, lo asir, it's not forbidden, not conditional, at the end of it. So it seems to me that the reason is because that really, you're allowed to do insulation on Shabbat. So then how can we forbid, right, to return it while it's still before Shabbat? Interesting. Okay, a lot more to go here. Let's see what we can do. Okay, so it says, רבנו, מה שכתב רבנו בעניין זה היה מטמין, מכסה פי הקירה. So that's the way he used to, he says the tour, that's the way he used to insulate, and he would cover right the top of the stove, beluach with a board, or b'davar acher, or some other things. Mashma b'lashono, so he says, implies from this language, that says Bet Yosef, sheim kisa pi aktera, that if he covered the top of the stove, of the pot, dish, beluach with some kind of a board, kiosebo, and something like that, she'en bo haval, which has no steam, klal at all. Asur letet begadim al aluch, and it's forbidden also to put clothing on top of the this board. אלא צריך שהלווה יהיה על פי הקירה. Has to be, it says, rather, that שלוח יהיה על פי הקירה, that the board should be on top of the stove. ככל שהוא על פי הקדרה, because if it's on top of this dish, מכסה כי תטמנה, it looks like he's insulating. ולפיכך עשה דפנות הקירה הגבוהים. Therefore, he says he made the walls of the stove high, from the top of the stove, from the top of the dish, the top of the pot. Today, שהלוח שנותנים עליו, in order that the board that they place on it, the clothing, לא ייגע בפי הקדרה, it shouldn't touch the top of the pot, dish. אפשר דהו הדין, so it says it could be that the same also applies, אם הלוח או הכיסוי נוגע בפי הקדרה. If the board or the cover touches the top of the pot. מאחר שהוא דבר שאינו מעלה הבל, since it's something which doesn't really give off any steam, heat, whatever, כלל at all. מפסיק ומותר לתת בגדים עליו. So it does separate them. So you're allowed to put the, and therefore it's allowed to put the clothing on it. ומה שעשה הראש, that was what Rosh did, he says, דפנות הקירה, the walls of the stove, the wall right, high, higher than the top of the pot. לא מפני שלא תגיע הלוח בפני הקדרה. It's not because, that it shouldn't come, right? The board to the top of the pot, אלא מפני שהתיישב הלוח יותר יפה. Rather, the point is it should be positioned better, that's this way. The board. וכן, should be positioned properly. וכן, נראה מדברי הר"ן, that's what seems from the Ran. לדעת רבנו יונה, according to these rabbis, ורשב"א, וגם מדברי רבנו ירוחם, שיכתוב בסמוך, also according to these rabbis. Okay, so all these rabbis seem to go the same way. ומה שכתב רבנו, אבל הטמנה שמטמינים רוב העולם, but he says the kind of insulation is done by most of the people, שמניחים הקדרה על הקירה, that they put the pot on top of the stove, and so we said that's more problematic because it's adding heat, since there's fire under it. וכן כתבו שם התוספות, that's what it says in תוספות there, וזה לשונו, this language of תוספות. The zitim maske havla. Oh, look what it says, right? That olives, they produce heat, right? So again, right, you see this concept that we spoke about last week, which is that, there are certain substances that tend to produce heat. That's what we call adding heat, So, as we said, right, some kind of reaction going on there. That's what it really is. Even though I'm not really aware of this, I don't know. I never learned about this in high school or college, but I don't know. I can't tell you. We didn't catch that in school. Anyway,
They can be burned. I mean, like, are they saying that this, Insulated thing is on a heating element?
So what he's saying is, right, simply, very simple, right, that olive pits, right, they add heat. You know why? Because they give off heat. They give off
I
steam.
really don't, but okay. I can't, I have no,
Yeah.
there's no logic that I can see
Never
how,
heard of it myself either, I have to tell you. I don't know.
unless they're actually burning, unless you're burning them as a fuel source, you've added heat to them.
But you know what it is, right? That obviously, right? If the rabbi said this, it must be true because otherwise, they weren't living in a dream world. You know what I mean?
Okay, but I'm going to ask you one more time. Is
Yeah.
this something that's already on, like a plata or some kind of heating
Right.
source?
No, he's saying, right, that
So you're taking it off the heating source and it's going to still produce more heat.
there are certain, as we said, right, certain substances that produce heat when they react with a certain kind of a food or something, whatever it is. Okay, whatever. I'm not going to get into it. We already spoke about that. So I'm not gonna come back to that again. But I'm just it's interesting, just whatever. Because before, when I learned this topic, I thought it was I thought it was a physical thing. But I think he's talking about some kind of chemical reaction. That's my current right thesis for this. Okay, whatever. I can't tell you. That's what I'm holding right now with this thing. Okay. Maybe one day we'll get to the truth of it. Right? We'll get to the bottom of it. Okay. All right, fantastic. Anyway, let's move on. So it says, מכאן יש לאסור להניח כחלים. From here, it says that we should forbid that to place coals under the dish, right? That's also adding heat. אפילו ייתן עליהם אפר, even if you place on top of the coals, right, some dirt, you still should not, right, insulate the pot on top of that. Right? Because the coals, right, they do add heat, right? That we know, right, for sure. We're not going to argue about that one. Okay, so that's for sure. Okay, so right? So he says, look what he says, right? It's just like olive pits. He's telling you that the coals is like olive pits. Wow, can you imagine? Come on, give it. Shil zetim. כלומר, דאף אגב, דמותר להשעות על גבי קירה, so it says, so yeah, okay, you're allowed to leave it on top of the stove, to leave it there. No problem. שיש בה כחלים, right, which has bowls, על פי הדרכים שנתבהרו בסימן רשנון ג', like according to the rules that we laid out, right, in the chapter over there, right, רשנון ג', before. שהיא מכוסה בבגדים, but it says here it's different. Why? Because you covered it with rags. So once you do that, right, you cover it with rags, and on the bottom you got coals going on. Right, so that's already adding heat, insulation, adding heat, not allowed. Okay. So this passage over here it really clarifies this issue a lot because it's telling you the difference between insulation and just leaving it on the fire, what's allowed, what's not allowed, right? To define this very well defined over here, what's going on. So that's very, very good. That's why it's very good to learn Bet Yosef, because the Bet Yosef really gets down to the nitty-gritty, in halacha. It's not like any other book. It's not really the same thing. Nothing compares to it. Okay. So let's move on. So look, now he also clarifies one more thing, right? He says, so it says, even though the rags don't add heat by themselves, but you know what it is? Because of the fire which is under it, that's why they're adding heat. It's a combination of the two. So therefore the rabbis forbade that. And the problem is, right, you're not allowed to insulate in something which adds heat, even before Shabbat. So that's the story.
Well, if the olive pits were on heat, I could see them being like, they're combustible.
Right. I understand.
On their own, they're not going to add heat.
I'm not going to convince you. I'm not even going to try. Forget about it. Let's just leave it. Let's just leave it as a a lost cause. Okay. So
that's just why I wanted to clarify if you're already talking about a pot that's already on heat.
Right. Okay, so yeah, there's still more what to discuss, but anyway, right, we're doing the best we can here.
So you're not going to answer that question then?
What's the question?
Are we talking about a pot that is already on a heat source?
So we're talking about two different scenarios, right? One is that it's on a heat source and it's covered with clothing. So that setup adds heat, and therefore it's forbidden. But what he's saying is here like this, right? He's comparing the two. He's saying, just like the coals adds heat, so does the olive pits. You know what I mean? He compares one to the other. That's
Okay, so you're talking about, in this case, it's a pot that's sitting on top of olive pits, but no heat.
Right. Even that is not allowed.
Okay.
Even that is not allowed. Okay. I can't tell you. I'll just leave it there, right? Whatever. I'm not going to go into that anymore. But anyway, right? Anyway, even though we haven't clarified that as maybe 100%, but it has brought a lot of clarity. This reading this regarding the halacha itself. So anyway, right? Let's move on. So look what he says right now. He says, right, kupa, like we said, right, that a box, shetaman that he insulated in there, you're not allowed to place that box on top of olive pits. So it's the same problem. Ken katav haram. That's what it says in Ran. Beresh perek b'met tomnin b'shem Rabbeinu Yona v'Rashba. So, right. So the Ran also says that. So this is a very nice explanation. In the name of Rabbi Yona and Rashba. Okay, beautiful. So I guess we'll stop here. It is 9:30. So if you could just stay on for a second, I just want to tell you something before you go. If you have a minute.
Sure.
Okay, let me just cut this down. Okay.